Does Uber or Lyft pay more in 2023? Now, I hate YouTubers that don't get right to the point, so I'm going to give you the simple, straightforward answer and then go more in depth, as there's a lot more to this than you can imagine. So jumping right into it, the straightforward answer, Lyft. Based off these statistics, as you can see, Lyft's hourly average is $17.50 as opposed to Uber's average of $15.68. In addition, and I think this is important to mention, Lyft also boasts better driver satisfaction. When asked whether they were happy driving for the company, 75.8% of Lyft drivers said yes, compared to Uber, where only 49.4% of drivers said yes. However, there is a bit of an asterisk on this. So in this video, I'm going to talk about the 5 biggest factors determining does Uber or Lyft actually pay more in 2023. Number 1, sign up with both apps. I've said this before in numerous videos, and I'm going to continue saying it because each app is a bit different. On some nights, Lyft might pay more. On other nights, Uber might pay more. So even though, yes, straightforward shot, based off these statistics, Lyft does pay more, I've noticed when driving, sometimes on a random Friday night, Uber actually pays more. When I first started driving, I decided to drive with Lyft. However, one day I was like, you know what, why not? It's free, right? It's free to sign up. Might as well sign up with Uber. And I realized, wait a minute, wow, Uber's actually paying more. And then I actually went back to Lyft because then Lyft started paying more. This can easily go back and forth, not even just month to month, but day to day even. Some of them might have some temporary bonuses, etc., etc. Remember too, both apps have a sign-on bonus. So make sure you use someone's link or code to sign up because you can easily get that sign-on bonus and then just stop driving for that app. So whether you want to drive for Lyft or Uber or a combination of the two, you can easily sign up with both, get those sign-on bonuses, which usually are a lot. I'm talking minimum $500. You do have to hit some requirements. It does depend on your area for these requirements, but once you hit them, you get a massive sign-on bonus. And remember too, with both apps, it's not like a minimum quota. They don't say, hey, you need to do 10 rides a month with us or something like that. You can easily sign up with both, and let's say you realize, you know what, Lyft does pay more. Based off the statistics, it should. But let's say in your given area, depending on how you drive, when you drive, and I will get into this, you might realize, like, actually, for me, Uber pays more, and you're able to get the best of both worlds by signing up with both apps. Number 2, your location. This is now a big meta perspective, and longtime listeners of this channel know exactly what I'm about to say. Your location is the number 1 factor that determines how much money you can make, not only with Uber versus Lyft, but Uber and Lyft. This is a classic picture I show. This is from Rideshare from 2018, and I know this was from a while ago, but this just shows that depending on your location, the average hourly rate can be super high or super low. And this does bring up a big meta question and meta perspective of, instead of, should you drive for Uber or Lyft in 2023 in terms of which one pays more, but it's really, should you drive for Uber and Lyft at all in 2023? Maybe given your location, and again, it really depends, given your location, maybe you're just better off finding a completely different job. Maybe the hourly rate and the average hourly rate for your area just isn't that good. And again, there are so many different factors that come into play with this. A big thing is your city's layout. How many people are taking Ubers and Lyfts? Are you an independent contractor or an employee? Is there a special clause? For example, after Prop 22 here in California, you have a minimum guaranteed hourly rate now. So even like say if you live in a bad area to drive here in California, you're still guaranteed a minimum hourly rate, which is pretty awesome. In other areas, however, that is not the case. This is why your location is super important, because the question shouldn't be Uber versus Lyft per se. The question should really be Uber and Lyft versus a potential other job that could pay more. But there's one huge way to determine this, which gets me into the next point. Number 3, check and test. I talk a lot on this channel all about analytics. The biggest way to make the most amount of money driving is check your analytics. When are there events? When are the best times to drive? In case you didn't know. I mean, this is pretty Uber and Lyft 101, but in case you didn't know, the peak hours or the best times to drive are morning commutes, so 7 to 9 a.m., evening commutes, 5 to 7 p.m., Friday and Saturday nights. I'd say maybe 8 or 9 p.m. till about 2 or 3 a.m. on Friday and Saturday nights. those are the best times to drive. However, every area is a little bit different in terms of the optimal times to drive, and this brings up the big question for this video, Uber versus Lyft. This also depends on which app is better. For some areas, Uber does pay more. For other areas, it is Lyft. So even though in the beginning of this video, I did mention look, statistically speaking, Lyft will pay more. Depending on your city, it could actually be Uber. This is why I always suggest check and test. Drive for Uber on a weekend. How much money do you make? Drive for Lyft on a weekend. How much money do you make? And compare. And like I said earlier in this video, it could go back and forth. Maybe by checking both apps, which I suggest you do, you realize, wow, on this weekend, Uber has a crazy bonus, and as a result, they're going to pay more. Or maybe on this weekend, Lyft has a crazy bonus, and they're going to pay more. Or maybe neither of them have a bonus, but on average, Lyft pays more or Uber pays more, so you can drive for them. It could even depend weekend to weekday. I've even heard some drivers tell me, for example, here in LA, that during the week, Uber pays more, but on the weekend, sometimes Lyft can actually pay more just given the way things turn out. And remember too, this can also generally go back and forth. Like I mentioned, I started driving for Lyft in Boston, then decided and realized, wow, after checking and testing, Uber's pay more. Was driving for Uber for a while. Then I realized, again, after doing some analytics testing, it actually went back. It actually turned out that for whatever reason, over a certain period of time, Lyft then started to pay more, so I went back to Lyft. This can go back and forth even in the same area. So I always suggest 1, checking and testing, and 2, looking at this one important factor, and that is bonuses. I've already mentioned bonuses tons of times already on this video, but when I talk to a lot of drivers who make a lot of money, I'm talking a very high hourly rate, the number one thing I hear over and over and over again is bonuses. They understand the bonus structures in their area. They find different ways and almost, so to speak, Lyft and Uber hacks to optimize how much money they can make with those bonuses. For example, my brother right now is driving for Lyft in Denver, Colorado, and when I asked him about, what's the average hourly rate, his exact response was, 20 to 25 an hour, I feel like is a good average hourly rate for Denver. But with the bonuses, if you do it right, about $40 to $50 an hour. That is a huge jump. That's almost a 2x jump in terms of driving normally, so to speak, as opposed to driving with the bonus structures in mind, really looking at the bonuses and trying to optimize your revenue as a result of them. And this is a very important thing to bring up for this video because yes, based off these statistics, Lyft pays more than Uber per hour, but maybe in your given area, the bonuses are so good with Uber, Uber might pay substantially more than Lyft, or vice versa. The bonuses can be a huge make or break, not only for how much money you can make, but it might also determine which app will pay more for your situation. And included with the bonus structures is also how you drive. This one can actually be a massive factor to determine, is Uber or Lyft actually gonna pay more? What I'm talking about for point number 5 is part-time versus full-time. Now for me personally, I like to be very transparent. I loved driving for Uber and Lyft part-time. Loved it. In my opinion, it really is the best second job to have. You can drive whenever you want, how you want. There's not like a huge barrier to entry. Most people have a car and have a driver's license. So it's not like you have to have a certification for something. It's not like you need a college degree, for example. So Uber and Lyft is a great secondary option. For me though, when driving full-time, I hate it. Again, that's my own personal take on it. However, I've met a lot of drivers who make insane money driving full-time. And this is where it gets really interesting because I talked before a lot about your location, bonuses, make sure you drive for both apps. But what I have noticed is this. A lot of drivers that drive part-time who make good money typically drive for Lyft, I've noticed. However, the drivers that I've talked to when traveling around the country who drive full-time, who make a lot of money, typically and mainly drive for Uber. And I think that's really interesting. Going way back to the beginning of this video, talking about that statistic that Lyft pays more than Uber, a big asterisk on that, among a lot of other asterisks that I've talked about in this video, is, I feel like most drivers typically sign up to drive part-time. That is the typical approach for most people. And if more people sign up with the mentality to drive part-time, it would make sense that maybe Lyft does pay more because maybe for part-time drivers, that is going to be the case that Lyft pays more than Uber. However, like I said, when it comes to full-time drivers, which aren't as common as part-time drivers, Uber maybe pays more. Again, this is just a theory, but this is why I think that Lyft pays more than Uber because there's more part-time drivers and Lyft traditionally might pay more for part-time drivers. When it comes to full-time drivers, Uber might pay more than Lyft, even though there's less full-time drivers when it comes to driving for ride-sharing in general. I remember, for example, I was in Austin, Texas. I've talked about this a couple of times in other videos. I was talking to a driver who's making over six figures, who's making over $100,000 a year driving. When I asked him, who do you drive for? Boom, right away, Uber. And again, more times than not, Uber is the number one result I hear from full-time drivers. And they always say as well, yeah, I make way more money driving for Uber than Lyft. But when I ask them more, they always drive full-time. So this is a bit of an interesting question. Maybe for you, when you sign up as a driver, let's say part-time, maybe Lyft will pay more than Uber. Statistically speaking, that should be the case. However, let's say you're like, you know what, I really like driving, I'm gonna move to full-time. Maybe Uber then might actually start paying more than Lyft. This comes back to the main point I said before, to always check and test. But there is one big curveball in this whole equation, and that is delivery driving. Depending on your area, delivery driving might pay more than Uber and Lyft, and it really depends. For example, in the Bay Area, as you can see in terms of the best performing apps, Uber Eats pays more than Grubhub, which pays more than Amazon Flex, which pays more than Uber, which pays more than Lyft. So in this case, Uber Eats is actually a better option than Uber and Lyft. However, if I go to Atlanta, as you can see at number 3, Lyft pays more than Uber. And that makes sense based off these statistics I've talked about in this video. However, even still, even though Lyft pays more than Uber, Uber Eats pays more than Lyft. I've already done a very in-depth analysis and video about delivery driving versus rideshare driving. I do have a link listed below to it in the description. But this is a big thing to consider. The barrier to entry is a lot smaller when it comes to Uber Eats and delivery driving as compared to rideshare driving. In addition, which is kind of convenient, if you sign up through Uber, they automatically, in a sense, sign you up for Uber Eats. And on the app, you can quickly select Uber Eats or Uber. This is another thing to add into the equation. Maybe you drive for Uber and Lyft and you realize, okay, Lyft pays more than Uber, but then you start driving for Uber Eats and you might realize like, oh wow, even though Lyft pays more than Uber Eats pays more than Lyft. This, of course, depends on a bunch of different factors like your location and a lot more. So the biggest thing I always suggest, at the end of the day, check and test, see which app pays more, which service pays more, like rideshare driving or delivery driving, and then go from there.